Tonight, I have another quiet story to share with you. First, please turn the volume down a little and adjust it to a comfortable level. And if you think you may want to return tomorrow night, you may wish to subscribe now, so this channel will be easy to find whenever you are ready to sleep again. When you get into bed, thoughts about today or tomorrow may fill your mind, and you may feel pressure to fall asleep. But there is no need to force it. Simply let my quiet voice draw your attention away from those thoughts. You do not need to follow every word. Just let it drift by like soft background music. And if you fall asleep along the way, that is perfectly all right. Now, let us slowly begin tonight's story. Let us begin beside a river. Not an ordinary river, but one of the longest and most important rivers in human history. The Nile flows through northeastern Africa, moving northward toward the Mediterranean Sea. Along much of its course through Egypt, it passes between wide regions of desert. From a distance, the contrast can seem almost impossible. There is pale sand and dry stone, and then, beside the water, a narrow ribbon of green. For the people of ancient Egypt, that river was not simply a feature of the landscape. It was the center of life. It brought water to the fields. It carried boats, people, animals, grain, timber, stone, and messages. It connected communities that might otherwise have been separated by long stretches of desert. It shaped the rhythm of work and the seasons of the year. The Nile flows from south to north. Because of this, the ancient Egyptians called the southern part of their country Upper Egypt, while the northern part, where the river spreads into a broad delta before entering the Mediterranean, was called Lower Egypt. To a modern listener, those names may sound reversed, but they follow the elevation and the direction from the river's higher reaches toward the lower delta. Each year, waters from far to the south cause the Nile to rise. The flooding covered parts of the valley and left behind dark, fertile soil. This renewed the farmland and allowed people to grow crops in a region that otherwise received very little rain. The Egyptians learned to guide and control water through basins, channels, and irrigation. Their ability to work with the river helped support larger settlements, specialized occupations, organized government, and a civilization that lasted for thousands of years. You might imagine standing quietly at the edge of the Nile in the early morning. The air is still cool. Reeds move near the bank. A small boat passes slowly, guided by oars or a simple sail. Beyond the green fields, the desert begins. The boundary between the cultivated land and the dry land can be sharp, as though two worlds meet in a single line. The ancient Egyptians sometimes described their fertile country as the Black Land, because of the rich soil left by the river. The surrounding desert was the Red Land. The Black Land gave food and life. The Red Land could be dangerous and difficult, but it also offered protection, stone, minerals, routes to distant places, and land for tombs beyond the fields. Long before pyramids rose at Giza, long before the names of famous pharaohs were carved into stone, people lived along the Nile as hunters, fishers, herders, and farmers. Settlements existed in Egypt by at least the 6th millennium before the Common Era. Over many generations, small communities learned to cultivate grain, keep animals, make pottery, weave baskets, shape tools, and trade with neighboring regions. The climate of very early Egypt was not exactly the same as it is today. Parts of the surrounding land were less dry, and animals that later became rare in Egypt appeared in early art and carvings. As conditions changed and the deserts expanded, the Nile Valley became even more important. People gathered near the dependable water and fertile soil. These early communities did not suddenly wake one morning and discover that they belonged to a great civilization. The change was gradual. Villages grew. Local leaders gained authority. Trade networks reached toward Nubia in the south, the deserts in the west, the eastern Mediterranean, and Western Asia. Crafts became more refined. Pottery, stone vessels, jewelry, cosmetic palettes, beads, and objects made from ivory, copper, gold, and imported materials reflected growing skill and wealth. Among the early cultures of Upper Egypt, the Bedarian and later the Naqada cultures are especially important to archaeologists. Over many centuries, the Naqada culture developed from farming communities into increasingly powerful societies. Its leaders controlled more land and resources. Its craftspeople created painted pottery, decorative stone vessels, jewelry, small figures, and a glazed material called faience. Written symbols also began to appear, eventually developing into the hieroglyphic writing for which Egypt became famous. We do not know every step in this long process. Much of the evidence comes from graves, settlements, tools, pottery, images, and other objects that survived underground. Yet these traces show that, before the first dynasty, the communities of the Nile Valley were already connected to a wider world. They traded southward into Nubia, eastward toward the Levant and Mesopotamia, and across desert routes to oases and mineral regions. In time, two major kingdoms emerged: Upper Egypt in the south and Lower Egypt in the north. Around 3100 before the Common Era, these two lands were united under one ruler. Later Egyptian tradition associated this unification with a king called Menes. Many Egyptologists connect Menes with Narmer, a ruler shown on the ceremonial Narmer palette wearing symbols of both Upper and Lower Egypt. The exact details remain uncertain, and unification may have been a gradual process rather than a single dramatic event. Still, the joining of the two lands became one of the central ideas of Egyptian kingship. The ruler was not merely the leader of one city. He represented the unity of the entire country, from the southern valley to the northern delta. Royal crowns, titles, ceremonies, and images repeatedly expressed this union. A capital was established at Memphis, near the point where the Nile Valley opens into the delta. From there, the king and his officials could oversee agriculture, labor, trade routes, and communication between north and south. A centralized state began to take shape. And so, beside the river, something remarkable had formed. A long, narrow country, protected in part by deserts, connected by water, nourished by annual floods, and governed in the name of a sacred king. The story of ancient Egypt had begun. The rulers of ancient Egypt are commonly called pharaohs, although that word came into use as a title later in Egyptian history. Originally, the Egyptian expression behind the word referred to the great house, meaning the royal palace. Over time, it became closely associated with the ruler himself. The pharaoh stood at the top of the state. He was a political leader, a military leader, a judge, a builder, a protector, and a religious figure. Egyptian kingship was linked to the gods and to the principle of order. The ruler was expected to maintain ma'at, a word that expressed truth, justice, balance, harmony, and the proper arrangement of the world. Ma'at was not only an abstract idea. It shaped how Egyptians understood the universe and society. The sun rose and set. The Nile returned. Crops grew in their season. Temples received offerings. Laws were upheld. Enemies were pushed away. In the Egyptian view, these patterns belonged to an ordered world. Disorder, violence, falsehood, and chaos threatened that balance. The pharaoh's responsibility was therefore immense. He was expected to support the gods through temples and rituals, govern the country, protect its borders, and keep society functioning. In official art, the pharaoh often appears larger than other people. He may stand before a god, present an offering, defeat enemies, or wear a crown that identifies him with Upper or Lower Egypt. These images were not simple portraits of everyday events. They expressed the ideal power and sacred role of kingship. Of course, no ruler could personally supervise every field, temple, workshop, quarry, tax record, legal case, and building project. Egypt depended on an extensive administration. At the highest levels were officials such as the vizier, who acted as one of the king's chief administrators. Below them were governors, priests, military commanders, treasury officials, overseers, record keepers, and scribes. Scribes were essential. They recorded taxes, counted grain, copied letters, measured fields, prepared legal documents, listed supplies, and preserved religious and literary texts. Learning to read and write required years of training. Most people did not become scribes, and literacy gave a person access to positions of authority and relative comfort. Imagine a scribe sitting with a writing board across his knees. He has a palette with dark and red pigment, a water container, and a reed brush. Before him lies a sheet of papyrus, or perhaps a piece of broken pottery or limestone used for a shorter note. Around him, workers may be unloading grain, measuring stone, or reporting the number of animals in a herd. The scribe turns activity into records, and records allow the state to remember. Ancient Egyptian society was hierarchical, but it was not completely fixed in every detail. At the top were the king and royal family, followed by high officials and leading priests. Below them were administrators, military officers, scribes, skilled craftspeople, merchants, farmers, laborers, and servants. Most people worked in agriculture, directly or indirectly, because the production of food supported everything else. Taxes were often collected in goods or labor rather than in coins, especially in earlier periods before coinage became common. Grain, livestock, linen, oil, and other products could be counted and stored. Large state and temple estates controlled land and employed many people. During periods when fields were covered by floodwater and agricultural work was reduced, labor could be directed toward public projects, quarrying, transport, or construction. The law was also linked to Ma'at. Egypt did not leave behind a single surviving law code, comparable to some other ancient civilizations. But legal documents reveal courts, contracts, property disputes, inheritance arrangements, testimony, and punishment. Local councils could hear cases, while more serious matters might rise to higher authorities. People could own and transfer property, make agreements, and bring complaints. Women in ancient Egypt had legal rights that were unusual in comparison with women in some other ancient societies. They could own property, inherit wealth, make contracts, and seek divorce. Most positions of formal political authority were held by men, yet women managed households, worked in agriculture and crafts, served in temples, and sometimes exercised considerable economic power. A small number ruled as pharaohs, the most famous being Hatshepsut and, much later, Cleopatra VII. Family life formed the center of ordinary society. Marriage was a social and household arrangement, and surviving documents show practical concerns about property, support, and inheritance. Children were valued, and sons and daughters could both inherit. Homes ranged from simple mud-brick dwellings to large estates with gardens and decorated rooms. The administration of Egypt could be strong for centuries, yet it was never automatic. It depended on successful harvests, communication, loyal officials, and a ruler capable of commanding resources. When royal authority weakened, regional governors could become more independent. When floods were poor, food shortages could strain the country. When succession was disputed, unity could break down. This pattern appears repeatedly in Egyptian history. Long periods of central power, which historians call kingdoms, were separated by intermediate periods of political division and instability. The Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom were not three separate civilizations. They were three great phases within a much longer tradition, each shaped by earlier achievements and later remembered by those who followed. Through all these changes, the idea of Egypt as the two lands remained. Dynasties rose and fell, capitals moved, foreign rulers arrived, temples gained and lost influence. Yet the image of a unified country under a sacred king returned again and again, like the river returning to its banks. The period called the Old Kingdom began around 2686 before the Common Era and lasted for about 5 centuries. It is sometimes known as the Age of the Pyramids, because this was the period in which the largest royal pyramids were designed and built. Before pyramids, elite tombs were often rectangular structures called mastabas. They had flat roofs and sloping sides, with burial chambers beneath the ground. The transition from mastaba to pyramid is connected with King Djoser of the 3rd dynasty and his architect Imhotep. At Saqqara, Djoser's builders created what is now called the step pyramid. It began with a mastaba-like form, but was enlarged in stages until it rose as a series of 6 great steps. Built mainly of stone, it was part of a much larger ceremonial complex, surrounded by walls, and containing courtyards, shrines, passages, and symbolic buildings. The step pyramid was not simply a large grave marker. It represented a new scale of royal construction. Stone, previously used more selectively, became the material of an enormous monument. Workers had to quarry blocks, transport them, shape them, plan their placement, organize supplies, and coordinate thousands of tasks. The project demonstrated both technical skill and the power of the central state. Imhotep became famous in later Egyptian tradition. He was remembered not only as an architect and official, but eventually honored as a figure connected with wisdom and healing. Whether every later story about him is historically exact is less important than what his memory tells us. The step pyramid was recognized, even in antiquity, as an extraordinary achievement. The development of pyramids continued under later kings. During the reign of Sneferu, builders experimented with forms that led toward the smooth-sided pyramid. At Dashur, the bent pyramid changes angle partway upward, giving it its distinctive shape. Nearby, the red pyramid is generally regarded as one of the earliest successful true pyramids. These experiments prepared the way for the monuments at Giza. On the desert plateau near modern Cairo stand 3 major pyramids built for the 4th dynasty pharaohs Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. The largest, the Great Pyramid, was built for Khufu. For thousands of years, it was the tallest human-made structure in the world. It was also included among the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and it is the only one of those wonders still largely standing. The Great Pyramid was constructed from an enormous quantity of stone. Its original outer casing of smooth limestone has mostly disappeared, leaving the inner blocks visible. Inside are passages, chambers, and spaces whose purpose and construction have been studied for generations. Even today, researchers continue to investigate the pyramid using surveying, imaging, and other methods. The exact sequence of every construction step is not known. Ancient Egyptian builders did not leave us a complete instruction manual. Scholars have proposed different systems of ramps, levers, sledges, work crews, and carefully planned transport. What is clear is that the pyramids were built by human beings through organized labor, engineering, administration, and skill. The old story that the pyramids were built entirely by masses of enslaved people is not supported by the archaeological evidence. Excavations near Giza have revealed settlements, food remains, tools, storage areas, and burials connected with workers. The labor force likely included permanent skilled crews, as well as rotating groups of workers. They had to be housed, fed, equipped, and coordinated. You might imagine the plateau not as a silent desert, but as an active construction landscape. Sledges move across prepared paths. Overseers call instructions. Stonecutters work with copper tools and harder stones. Bakers prepare bread. Brewers produce beer. Boats arrive with limestone from quarries. Scribes record deliveries and labor groups. Dust rises in the sunlight. The project continues, season after season. The pyramid was one part of a larger complex. A royal pyramid complex usually included a valley temple near the cultivated land, a causeway leading upward, a mortuary temple beside the pyramid, smaller pyramids, boat pits, and tombs for members of the royal family and important officials. Near the pyramid of Khafre is the Great Sphinx, a colossal figure with a lion's body and a human head, generally associated with Khafre. The Sphinx was carved largely from the limestone bedrock. Its meaning has inspired many interpretations, but in the Egyptian context, it joined royal identity with the strength and protective power of the lion. The third large pyramid at Giza, built for Menkaure, is smaller than those of Khufu and Khafre, yet it belongs to the same remarkable sacred landscape. Around the royal monuments, mastabas and other tombs formed organized cemeteries for relatives and officials who wished to be buried near the king. Why build a pyramid at all? The answer lies partly in kingship and partly in beliefs about death and renewal. The pharaoh was expected to continue in a transformed existence after death. The tomb protected his body and burial goods, while rituals and offerings supported his eternal life. The shape of the pyramid may also have carried solar meaning, linking the king to the sun and the heavens. The Egyptians did not separate religion, politics, and architecture in the way modern people sometimes do. A pyramid was a tomb, a sacred symbol, a royal statement, an administrative project, and a lasting center of ritual. Its stone mass declared that the king's place in the cosmic order would continue beyond a single human lifetime. Yet even a pyramid could not guarantee safety. Tomb robbers entered many royal monuments, sometimes not long after burial. Precious materials disappeared. Bodies were disturbed. Later kings changed their burial practices, but the pyramids remained, enormous and quiet, watching the edge of the valley as dynasties passed below them. The Old Kingdom was a period of impressive central authority, but its stability did not last forever. By the end of the 6th dynasty, the power of the central government weakened. Regional governors, often called nomarchs, had gained influence. Long reigns and uncertain succession may have contributed to political strain. There is also evidence that periods of low Nile flooding and drought affected food production. When the state could no longer distribute resources and maintain authority as effectively as before, Egypt entered what historians call the First Intermediate Period. The country was divided among competing centers of power. Later Egyptian writings remembered disorder, hunger, and social reversal, although literary descriptions may have exaggerated chaos to praise the rulers who restored unity. For ordinary people, political division did not mean that every part of life stopped. Farmers still planted when conditions allowed. Families still raised children. Craftspeople still made pottery, cloth, tools, and coffins. Local rulers built tombs and supported regional traditions. But the unified royal system of the Old Kingdom had fractured. Eventually, rulers based at Thebes in Upper Egypt defeated rivals and reunited the country. Mentuhotep II of the 11th dynasty is generally credited with restoring central rule around 2055 before the Common Era. His victory began the era known as the Middle Kingdom. The Middle Kingdom was a time of renewed administration, agriculture, building, trade, literature, and expansion. Kings strengthened the central government and limited some of the independence of regional governors. They improved control of the Fayum region, developed irrigation, and expanded cultivation. Egyptian influence moved southward into Nubia, a region rich in gold and important trade routes. Fortresses were built along the Nile to secure the frontier and control movement. Trade brought gold, ivory, incense, animal products, stone, timber, and other valuable materials. The Middle Kingdom also produced literature that later Egyptians regarded as classic. Stories, wisdom teachings, hymns, and reflections on kingship were copied by scribes for generations. One famous narrative tells of Sinuhe, an official who flees Egypt after hearing of a king's death, lives for years in a foreign land, and eventually longs to return home and receive an Egyptian burial. The story reveals the deep connection between identity, homeland, royal order, and the hope for a proper afterlife. Royal tomb design changed. Some Middle Kingdom rulers built pyramids, but these often used mud brick cores with stone casing and have not survived as completely as the great stone pyramids of the Old Kingdom. Monumental temples and statues continued to express royal power. Yet art could present kings with a more serious or careworn appearance than earlier idealized images. During the Middle Kingdom, beliefs and burial practices that had once been especially associated with royalty became available more broadly to wealthy, non-royal people. Coffins were painted with spells and images intended to assist the dead. These coffin texts developed from earlier royal pyramid texts, and later contributed to the collection now commonly called the Book of the Dead. A person preparing for burial might hope for food, protection, breath, movement, and recognition in the next world. The afterlife was imagined not merely as a vague spirit realm, but as a place in which one would need identity, knowledge, moral worth, and ritual support. The Middle Kingdom lasted for several centuries, but once again central power weakened. Officials and local rulers gained greater independence. New groups had settled in the eastern Nile Delta, including people from Western Asia, Among them were the Hyksos, whose name is usually understood to mean foreign rulers. Around the 17th century before the Common Era, Hyksos kings took control of much of northern Egypt and ruled from Avaris in the delta. They adopted many Egyptian customs, titles, and forms of government. Their rule was not simply the replacement of everything Egyptian by something foreign. Instead, Egyptian and Western Asian elements existed together. The Hyksos are associated with technologies and military practices that became important in Egypt, including the horse-drawn chariot and new types of weapons. In the south, Egyptian rulers based at Thebes remained independent or partly subordinate. Egypt was divided again, with Hyksos power in the north, Theban rulers in the south, and Nubian powers beyond the southern border. Conflict lasted for decades. The Theban kings gradually strengthened their position. Seqenenre-Tao, Kamose, and finally Ahmose I fought against the Hyksos. Ahmose drove them from their strongholds and pursued them beyond Egypt. He then turned south to secure control over Nubia. With these victories, Ahmose founded the 18th dynasty and began the New Kingdom, the period in which ancient Egypt reached its greatest imperial power. The New Kingdom began around the middle of the 16th century before the Common Era. It was an age of military expansion, international diplomacy, wealth, temple building, and some of the most famous rulers in Egyptian history. The memory of foreign rule shaped the policies of the early New Kingdom. Pharaohs maintained a stronger standing army and pushed Egypt's borders outward. Campaigns extended south into Nubia and northeast into the Levant. Egypt gained access to tribute, trade, gold, timber, metal, horses, luxury goods, and strategic routes. Thutmose I campaigned in both Nubia and Western Asia. His daughter Hatshepsut later became one of Egypt's most remarkable rulers. Hatshepsut first served as regent for the young Thutmose III, her stepson and nephew. She then assumed the full titles and authority of a pharaoh. In official images, she could appear in female form, but she was also represented with traditional male royal symbols, including the ceremonial false beard. This did not mean that her identity was unknown. It showed that Egyptian kingship had established visual forms, and Hatshepsut used those forms to present herself as a legitimate ruler. Her reign emphasized stability, building, religious devotion, and trade. She restored temples and commissioned monuments. At Karnak, she raised great obelisks. Across the river at Deir el-Bahri, Her mortuary temple was built against the cliffs in a series of terraces and colonnades. The structure seems to rise naturally from the desert landscape behind it. Reliefs at the temple describe an expedition to Punt, a trading region, probably located around the Red Sea and the Horn of Africa. Egyptian ships returned with incense, trees, ivory, exotic animals, and other goods. The scenes preserve details of boats, people, houses, and cargo, though they also present the expedition as part of the pharaoh's divinely approved success. After Hatshepsut's death, Thutmose III ruled alone and became one of Egypt's greatest military pharaohs. He led repeated campaigns in Western Asia and expanded Egyptian influence to its widest extent. At the Battle of Megiddo, his forces defeated a coalition of local rulers. Egyptian records describe the campaign in detail, including strategic decisions and lists of captured goods. Imperial control did not always mean direct administration of every foreign city. Local rulers could remain in place if they acknowledged the pharaoh, paid tribute, and sent family members to the Egyptian court as guarantees of loyalty. Diplomacy, marriage alliances, gift exchange, and warfare all formed part of international relations. The wealth of the empire flowed into Egypt. Temples, especially the great complex of Amun at Karnak, gained land, workers, animals, and treasure. Pharaohs added pylons, courts, halls, obelisks, statues, and sanctuaries. Each ruler could connect his or her reign to the sacred landscape created by earlier kings. The capital and royal residence moved at different times, but Thebes became the great religious center of the new kingdom. On the eastern bank of the Nile stood temples associated with the living city and the daily worship of the gods. On the western bank, where the sun set, were mortuary temples, tombs, and cemeteries connected with death and renewal. Earlier kings had built highly visible pyramids. New Kingdom pharaohs were instead buried in hidden rock-cut tombs in the Valley of the Kings. The burial chamber was separated from the mortuary temple, where offerings and ceremonies took place. This arrangement may have been intended partly to protect royal burials from robbery, although many tombs were eventually entered and looted. The walls of royal tombs were covered with religious texts and images describing the sun god's nightly journey through the underworld. The dead king joined this journey and hoped to be reborn with the rising sun. Stars, gods, protective beings, boats, gates, and mysterious regions filled the painted chambers. The tomb was a place of darkness, but its art described movement toward light. Nearby, in the village now called Deir el-Medina, skilled workers lived with their families. These craftspeople cut and decorated the royal tombs. Because many records, letters, Notes, legal documents, and household objects survived there. Deir el-Medina gives modern scholars an unusually detailed view of community life. The workers were organized into crews. They received rations, including grain. They had supervisors, scribes, doctors, and local courts. They argued over property, borrowed tools, wrote letters, prayed to household gods, celebrated festivals, and sometimes missed work because of illness, family duties, or other reasons. During the reign of Ramses III, delayed rations helped cause one of the earliest recorded labor strikes in history. Workers stopped work and demanded the food owed to them. This small community reminds us that the great tombs were not made by anonymous hands without lives of their own. Behind every painted wall were people with families, worries, skills, jokes, beliefs, and hopes. The new kingdom was powerful, but it was not always peaceful or stable. Around the 14th century before the Common Era, Pharaoh Amenhotep IV introduced one of the most dramatic religious changes in Egyptian history. He elevated the Aten, the visible disk of the sun, above the traditional gods, and changed his name to Akhenaten. Worship of Amun and other deities was restricted or suppressed. The royal court moved from Thebes to a new city called Akhetaten, meaning the horizon of the Aten, at the site now known as Amarna. The new capital was built quickly, on land that had not been occupied by a major city. Temples to the Aten were designed with open courts, allowing sunlight to enter. Art from the period changed as well. Royal figures were shown with elongated heads, narrow chests, rounded bodies, and other distinctive features. Some scenes presented the royal family in intimate moments, beneath the rays of the Aten, whose hands extended toward them. It is difficult to know exactly how ordinary Egyptians experienced these reforms. Official monuments show the king's program, but private beliefs may have continued in homes and communities. Akhenaten's religious revolution was closely connected with the royal family, especially his queen, Nefertiti, who appears prominently in art. Meanwhile, Egypt's position abroad became more difficult. Letters written on clay tablets, in the diplomatic language of the time, reveal requests, complaints, alliances, and disputes among rulers of Egypt, Western Asia, and the great powers of the Near East. These documents, known as the Amarna letters, provide a rare view of international correspondence. After Akhenaten's death, the new religious system did not last. The court returned to the traditional gods, especially Amun, and the capital moved away from Akhetaten. Akhenaten's monuments were dismantled or reused, and later kings tried to remove his name from official memory. One of the young rulers who followed was Tutankhamun. He changed his name to Tutankhamun, signaling the restoration of Amun. Tutankhamun became pharaoh as a child, perhaps around 9 years old. His reign was brief, and he died while still a young man. During his lifetime, Tutankhamun was not one of Egypt's most powerful kings. His fame comes mainly from what happened more than 3,000 years after his burial. In 1922, the archaeologist Howard Carter, supported by Lord Carnarvon, discovered steps leading to a sealed tomb in the Valley of the Kings. Other royal tombs had been robbed in antiquity, and many scholars believed that little remained to be found. Tutankhamun's tomb, however, had been covered by debris and largely escaped the looters. When Carter's team entered, they found rooms crowded with objects. There were gilded shrines, chariots, beds, chairs, boxes, statues, weapons, clothing, jewelry, food, games, and ritual equipment. The burial chamber contained nested shrines and coffins. The young king's mummy wore a gold burial mask that became one of the most recognizable images of ancient Egypt. The discovery was important, not only because of gold. The objects revealed details of royal craftsmanship, religion, furniture, clothing, transportation, ceremony, and daily life. A relatively small royal tomb contained thousands of items intended to support the king in the afterlife. The discovery also encouraged popular stories about a curse. Several people connected with the excavation died in later years, and newspapers created dramatic accounts. Yet there is no reliable evidence of a supernatural curse. Many who entered the tomb lived for decades. The story of the curse belongs more to modern fascination than to the archaeological facts. Tutankhamun's mummy remained a subject of scientific study. Researchers have examined his age, health, injuries, family relationships, and possible causes of death. Conclusions have changed as methods improved, and some questions remain uncertain. The careful language of archaeology is important here. A body can provide evidence, but it does not always give one simple answer. After the Amarna period, rulers, including Horemheb, worked to restore traditional institutions. The 19th dynasty followed, bringing another famous royal family and the long reign of Ramses II. Ramses II ruled Egypt for more than 6 decades during the 13th century before the Common Era. His long reign, enormous building program, many statues, and repeated appearance in inscriptions gave him a presence that still seems to fill the Egyptian landscape. His name can be found at temples from the Delta to Nubia. Some monuments were built during his reign. Others were older works to which his name was added. This practice was not unique to Ramses, but the scale of his activity made his legacy especially visible. Early in his reign, Ramses fought the Hittite Empire for influence in the Levant. The most famous encounter was the Battle of Kadesh, fought near the Orontes River in what is now Syria. Egyptian inscriptions describe the pharaoh's courage after his forces were surprised and temporarily separated. The texts present Ramses as almost single-handedly turning disaster into victory. The historical result was less simple. Neither side gained a final decisive triumph, and the struggle continued. Years later, Egypt and the Hittites concluded a peace treaty. Versions of the agreement survive in both Egyptian hieroglyphs and Hittite cuneiform. It is among the earliest known surviving international peace treaties. The agreement promised peace and mutual support. It also reflected a practical recognition that the two great powers had reasons to cooperate. Diplomatic relations were strengthened, and Ramses later married a Hittite princess. Ramses moved the royal residence to a city in the eastern delta called Pi-Ramesses. From there, the court could oversee routes toward Western Asia. The city contained palaces, temples, storage areas, military facilities, and workshops. Its exact appearance has vanished, but archaeology has helped identify parts of the region connected with it. The most dramatic surviving monuments of Ramses are perhaps the temples at Abu Simbel, near Egypt's southern frontier. The larger temple was cut into a mountainside. 4 colossal seated statues of Ramses guard the entrance. Inside, chambers extend deep into the rock, with reliefs showing the king, the gods, and military scenes. The temple was aligned so that sunlight entered its interior on particular days of the year and illuminated statues in the sanctuary. The exact meaning of the dates has been discussed, but the effect shows careful planning. Beside the great temple stands a smaller temple dedicated to the goddess Hathor and to Ramses's queen, Nefertari. Its facade includes large standing figures of both king and queen. Nefertari was honored in other ways as well, including through her beautifully decorated tomb in the Valley of the Queens. Centuries passed, and sand covered much of the Abu Simbel complex. Its entrance was cleared in the early 19th century. Then, in the 20th century, the temples faced a new danger. The construction of the Aswan High Dam would create a reservoir that threatened to submerge the site. An international rescue project cut the temples into large blocks, moved them to higher ground, and reconstructed them in a new artificial hill. The operation preserved the monuments, though their landscape was necessarily changed. It became one of the most famous archaeological conservation projects ever attempted. Ramses II lived into old age. After his death, his mummy was eventually moved from its original tomb to a hidden royal cache, probably to protect it from robbery. It was discovered in the 19th century among the remains of other kings and queens. In the 1970s, the mummy was taken to Paris for examination and conservation after signs of deterioration. The often repeated story that Ramses received a modern passport reflects the formal arrangements made for transporting a royal human body across national borders. Whether one focuses on the document or the ceremony, the episode shows the extraordinary meeting of an ancient ruler and modern institutions. Ramses was followed by a series of successors. Egypt remained powerful, but pressures increased. Foreign conflicts, changes in trade, internal competition, and economic difficulties weakened the state. During the reign of Ramses III, Egypt fought groups often called the Sea Peoples. The exact identities and movements of these groups remain debated, but inscriptions describe battles on land and water. Egypt survived the attacks, yet the cost was high. The wider Eastern Mediterranean world was experiencing upheaval, and several Bronze Age states collapsed. Later, in Ramses III's reign, a conspiracy formed within the royal household. Judicial records describe a plot involving members of the palace and harem. Modern examination of the king's mummy has supported the conclusion that he died violently. At the same time, economic trouble affected workers and institutions. The strike at Deir el-Medina occurred because rations were delayed. Tomb robbery became more common. Priests, officials, and military leaders competed for power. By the end of the New Kingdom, Egypt had lost much of its empire abroad. In the south, high priests of Amun exercised great authority at Thebes, while kings in the north ruled from the delta. The country entered the Third Intermediate Period, another long age of division and shifting dynasties. The New Kingdom had been the summit of Egyptian imperial power. Its end did not mean the end of Egyptian civilization, but the political world had changed. The great temples remained. Rituals continued. Scribes copied old texts. Farmers returned to the river. Yet the age in which Egypt dominated a wide empire had passed. During the centuries after the New Kingdom, Egypt was ruled by dynasties of different regional and foreign backgrounds. Libyan leaders established themselves in parts of the country. Nubian kings from Kush, to the south, later reunited Egypt and formed what is known as the 25th dynasty. The Kushite rulers respected and revived many Egyptian traditions. They presented themselves as pharaohs, supported temples, and built monuments. Their rule reminds us that the political and cultural connections between Egypt and Nubia had existed for thousands of years. At different times, Egypt controlled Nubian territory. Nubian states resisted Egypt, and Nubian kings ruled Egypt. The expanding Assyrian Empire eventually invaded. Assyrian armies entered Egypt, and the Kushite pharaohs withdrew southward. A new Egyptian dynasty, based at Sais, then restored a degree of independence. This Saite period looked back to older artistic and religious traditions, while also maintaining active trade with the Mediterranean world. Greek merchants and soldiers became increasingly present in Egypt. A Greek trading settlement at Naucratis developed in the delta. Egypt hired foreign mercenaries and participated in the complicated politics of the Eastern Mediterranean and Near East. In 525 before the Common Era, the Persian king Cambyses II conquered Egypt. The country became part of the vast Achaemenid Persian Empire. Persian rulers were recognized as pharaohs, though Egyptian resistance and rebellion continued. Egypt regained independence for several decades, then was conquered again by Persia. In 332 before the Common Era, Alexander the Great entered Egypt. Persian rule collapsed with little resistance there, and Alexander was welcomed as a liberator. He visited the Oracle of Amun at Siwa Oasis and founded a new city on the Mediterranean coast, Alexandria. Alexander did not live to see the city's full development. After his death, his empire was divided among his generals. Ptolemy took control of Egypt and eventually declared himself king. His descendants formed the Ptolemaic dynasty, which ruled for nearly 3 centuries. The Ptolemies were Macedonian Greek in origin, and Greek became the language of the royal court and much of the administration. Alexandria grew into a great port and intellectual center. Its famous library and scholarly institutions attracted writers, scientists, mathematicians, physicians, and philosophers from across the Mediterranean world. Yet traditional Egyptian culture did not disappear. The Ptolemies built temples in Egyptian style, supported priesthoods, made offerings to Egyptian gods, and represented themselves on temple walls as pharaohs. Temples at places such as Edfu, Dendera, and Philae preserve extensive inscriptions and reliefs from this era. Greek and Egyptian traditions sometimes blended. The god Serapis, for example, combined elements that could appeal to both cultures. The goddess Isis gained worshippers far beyond Egypt. In art and religion, identities could exist side by side, rather than simply replacing one another. The Ptolemaic royal family was troubled by rivalry, rebellion, and conflict over succession. Kings and queens often ruled with relatives, and palace politics could become violent. At the same time, Rome grew stronger and increasingly involved itself in Egyptian affairs. The last active ruler of the dynasty was Cleopatra VII. She is often remembered mainly through later Roman stories, paintings, plays, and films. But she was a capable monarch, facing an extremely dangerous political situation. Unlike many of her Ptolemaic predecessors, she learned the Egyptian language, in addition to Greek and other languages. Cleopatra first allied herself with Julius Caesar during a struggle for the throne. After Caesar's assassination, she formed a political and personal alliance with Mark Antony. Their rivalry with Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, became part of Rome's civil wars. In 31 before the Common Era, the forces of Antony and Cleopatra were defeated by Octavian at the Battle of Actium. The following year, Octavian entered Egypt. Antony and Cleopatra died, and Egypt became a Roman province. The death of Cleopatra in 30 before the Common Era is often used as the endpoint of ancient Egyptian political independence. The pharaonic civilization had lasted for roughly 3,000 years, from the early unification of the two lands. But historical endings are rarely complete and immediate. Under Roman rule, Egyptian temples remained active for centuries. Mummification continued. Egyptian gods were still worshipped. Roman emperors could be shown in temples, wearing the crowns and performing the rituals of pharaohs, even though they governed from far away. Alexandria remained a major city. Egypt supplied grain to Rome and occupied a vital place in imperial trade. New artistic forms appeared, including mummy portraits painted in a naturalistic Greco-Roman style and attached to wrapped bodies. Christianity gradually spread through Egypt. Over centuries, Christian communities grew, traditional temples declined, and the ancient hieroglyphic script fell out of use. The Egyptian language survived in a later form known as Coptic, written mainly with Greek letters and a few additional signs. The world of the pharaohs did not vanish in a single day. It changed slowly, through conquest, adaptation, religious transformation, and the passing of languages. Stone temples outlasted the rituals once performed inside them. Tombs were sealed and forgotten. Sand covered cities and shrines. Names remained carved on walls, waiting for readers who had not yet learned how to understand them. So far, we have followed kings, wars, dynasties, and monuments. But most ancient Egyptians were not pharaohs, priests, generals, or royal architects. They were farmers, herders, fishers, bakers, brewers, weavers, potters, builders, sailors, metalworkers, merchants, servants, scribes, and craftspeople. Their lives were shaped by family, work, neighborhood, season, and social position. The details changed across 3,000 years, and a wealthy household in a major city was very different from a farmer's home in a village. Still, surviving objects and texts allow us to enter ordinary spaces for a moment. Most houses were built from mud brick. Nile mud was shaped into bricks and dried in the sun. Wood was less abundant and could be expensive, so it was used carefully for roofs, doors, columns, furniture, and fittings. Because mud brick buildings erode more easily than stone temples and tombs, far fewer ordinary homes have survived. A simple house might include a few rooms, a courtyard, storage space, and the roof used for work or sleeping during hot weather. More prosperous homes could have reception rooms, private areas, columns, painted walls, gardens, pools, kitchens, workshops, and quarters for servants. Windows were often small and placed high to reduce heat and dust. Floors could be packed earth or plaster. Furniture included stools, chairs, chests, beds, low tables, and woven mats. People stored grain, oil, clothing, tools, and household objects in baskets, jars, and boxes. The kitchen might be partly open to the air. Bread was made in many shapes from wheat or barley. Grain had to be ground into flour, a task that could introduce tiny particles of stone from the grinding process. This contributed to severe wear on many ancient Egyptian teeth. Beer was a basic part of the diet. It was nutritious and consumed by people of different ages and classes, although ancient beer was not identical to most modern beer. Bread and beer were central to wages and rations. Onions, garlic, lentils, beans, cucumbers, lettuce, dates, figs, grapes, and other foods supplemented the diet. Fish from the Nile could be eaten fresh, dried, or salted. Ducks, geese, pigeons, and other birds were caught or raised. Cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs provided meat, milk, hides, and labor, though meat was more common for the wealthy or during festivals than as an everyday food for everyone. Wine was produced from grapes and was especially associated with wealth and celebration. Clothing was usually made from linen woven from flax. The light fabric suited the warm climate. Styles changed over the centuries, from simple kilts and dresses to pleated garments and more elaborate robes. Children are often shown with little clothing, especially when young. Many people went barefoot in daily life, while sandals made from leather or plant fiber were also used. Wigs could be worn by men and women, especially among the elite. Hair might be cut short for cleanliness and comfort. Cosmetics were important for both men and women. Eye paint was made in green and black forms, using mineral materials. It decorated the eyes, reduced glare, and may have helped protect against infection. Cosmetics also had religious and magical associations. Oils and scented ointments were used on the skin in the dry climate. Jewelry was worn across social levels, though materials differed. Gold, silver, turquoise, carnelian, lapis lazuli, glass, faience, shell, and colored stones could be made into collars, bracelets, rings, earrings, beads, and amulets. Even a simple faience amulet might carry a protective meaning. Children played with toys, dolls, balls, and animal figures. They learned skills from parents or through apprenticeship. Boys selected for scribal training studied writing and mathematics, often copying texts that praised the profession of the scribe over harder physical labor. Girls learned household, agricultural, craft, and economic skills, though women could also work in workshops, estates, temples, and markets. Music accompanied festivals, worship, work, and entertainment. Instruments included harps, lutes, lyres, flutes, pipes, drums, rattles, clappers, and the sistrum, which was especially associated with religious ritual. Singers and dancers appear in tomb paintings and temple scenes. Games offered relaxation. Senet was played for more than 2,000 years. Its board had 30 squares, and pieces moved according to the casting of sticks or similar devices. Over time, the game also acquired symbolic associations with the journey to the afterlife. Other games included Mehen and the game now called Hounds and Jackals. Children and adults enjoyed ball games, wrestling, swimming, fishing, hunting, boating, and storytelling. Wealthy people hunted birds in the marshes or larger animals in the desert. Tomb paintings often show an ideal world of abundant food, active family life, and successful hunting. These scenes should not always be read as photographs of a single day. They were designed to preserve desirable activities forever. A tomb owner shown fishing in the marshes might be expressing pleasure, status, fertility, victory over disorder, and the hope of continuing such life after death. The ancient Egyptians experienced illness, accidents, childbirth, hunger, grief, arguments, aging, and uncertainty, just as people always have. Yet their surviving songs, letters, jokes, love poems, complaints, and household records also reveal affection and humor. A person might write to a relative asking for supplies. A worker might complain that sandals had not arrived. A husband and wife might dispute property. A child might practice writing. A neighbor might borrow a tool. A family might leave food at a tomb and speak the name of someone who had died. The civilization of ancient Egypt was created not only by the people whose faces were carved in colossal stone. It was created every day by hands kneading bread, pulling reeds, steering boats, counting jars, shaping clay, spinning thread, lifting blocks, tending animals, and writing words. Agriculture followed the cycle of the Nile. The ancient Egyptian year was commonly divided into 3 seasons. Akhet was the season of inundation, when the river flooded the fields. Peret was the season of emergence or growth, when the waters receded and crops were planted. Shamu was the season of harvest, before the next flood returned. The exact timing and success of the flood mattered deeply. If the water rose too little, fields might remain dry and crops could fail. If it rose too high, homes, dikes, and settlements could be damaged. A good flood renewed the soil and filled irrigation basins. Farmers used plows drawn by oxen, hoes, baskets, sickles, and wooden tools. Seed could be scattered over prepared ground, and animals might be driven across the field to press it into the soil. At harvest, workers cut grain with sickles, gathered it, threshed it, winnowed it, and transported it to storage. Grain was wealth. It fed families, supported workers, supplied temples, paid taxes, and could be stored for difficult years. Officials measured fields and harvests. Scribes recorded quantities. Large granaries protected reserves, although no storage system could remove every danger of shortage or corruption. The Egyptians grew emmer wheat and barley, along with flax for linen. Gardens produced vegetables, herbs, fruit, and flowers. Dates and figs were common. Grapes were cultivated for wine. Papyrus grew in marshy areas and became useful for boats, baskets, rope, mats, sandals, and writing material. The papyrus plant had a tall triangular stem, topped by a spreading cluster of fine branches. To make writing sheets, the inner stem was cut into thin strips. The strips were placed in crossing layers, pressed, dried, and smoothed. Sheets could be joined into rolls. Not every document was written on papyrus. It was valuable, and everyday notes were often written on ostraca, fragments of pottery or flakes of limestone. Thousands of such pieces survive from places like Deir el-Medina, carrying messages, calculations, sketches, lists, and practice exercises. Water had to be lifted when fields stood above the river or canals. In later periods, devices such as the shadoof were used. A shadoof consists of a long pole balanced on a support, with a container on one end and a counterweight on the other. It allows a person to raise water with less effort. Agriculture was hard physical work. Heat, insects, injuries, and disease were constant concerns. Yet the river valley was exceptionally productive when managed well. Surplus food allowed some people to specialize as craftspeople, priests, soldiers, administrators, and scholars. The Nile was also Egypt's main road. Travel over land could be slow and difficult, while boats could move heavy cargo efficiently. Because the river flowed north, and prevailing winds often blew from the north, boats could drift downstream with the current and sail upstream with the wind. Small reed boats served local needs, while larger wooden vessels carried people, grain, cattle, stone, and military forces. Egypt had limited supplies of large timber, so cedar and other wood could be imported from the Levant, especially from the region of Lebanon. River harbors connected fields, cities, temples, quarries, and royal building sites. Massive stone blocks were often transported by boat when water levels allowed. Obelisks cut from granite at Aswan could be moved hundreds of miles north. The river supported fish, birds, and plants. Fishermen used nets, hooks, harpoons, baskets, and traps. Marsh scenes show men standing on light boats among papyrus reeds, hunting birds with throwing sticks or spearing fish. Cattle were especially important. Herd size could indicate wealth, and animals were counted for taxation. Oxen pulled ploughs and heavy loads. Sheep and goats provided meat, milk, hair, and hides. Donkeys carried goods across land routes. Horses arrived during the Second Intermediate Period and became closely linked with chariots and elite display. Cats, dogs, and monkeys could be household companions. Cats were useful for controlling rodents and snakes, and became associated with deities such as Bastet. Dogs served in hunting, guarding, and companionship. Some pets were given names, shown beneath their owners' chairs, and even mummified after death. Animals were not simply divided into ordinary creatures and gods. Egyptian religion understood divine powers through many forms. A deity might be represented as a human, an animal, or a human body with an animal head. The living animal was not always thought to be the god itself, but particular animals could embody sacred qualities or serve as manifestations of divine power. Crocodiles, ibises, falcons, jackals, cows, lions, cats, beetles, snakes, and many other creatures carried religious meanings. Some sacred animals were kept in temples and carefully buried. In later periods, animal mummification became a large religious activity, with pilgrims offering mummified animals associated with particular gods. To the modern eye, the Egyptian landscape may appear dominated by stone, but to the ancient people, the living world of river, mud, reeds, crops, birds, fish, cattle, insects, and desert animals was everywhere. Their art and religion grew from close observation of that world. The scarab beetle, for example, became a symbol of transformation and renewal. The way certain beetles rolled balls across the ground suggested the movement of the sun. The falcon's flight connected it with the sky. The jackal's presence near desert cemeteries helped link it with protection of the dead. Nature was practical, beautiful, dangerous, and sacred at the same time. The Nile could feed a country, and it could fail. The desert could protect Egypt, and it could kill an unprepared traveler. The sun gave light and order, but its heat could be severe. Egyptian life rested on balance, and balance was never taken for granted. Ancient Egyptian religion lasted in changing forms for more than 3,000 years. It did not have a single fixed scripture or one unchanging list of gods. Beliefs developed across regions and periods, and different traditions could exist together. The Egyptians worshipped a great number of gods and goddesses. Modern summaries sometimes say more than 2,000. Some were known across the country. Others belonged mainly to a particular city, temple, profession, danger, or function. Ra was a sun god, associated with creation and royal power. Amun rose from a local Theban deity to become one of the most important gods of the New Kingdom, often joined with Ra as Amun-Ra. Osiris ruled the realm of the dead and represented death, regeneration, and rightful kingship. Isis, his wife and sister, was linked with motherhood, healing, protection, and magic. Their son Horus, often shown as a falcon or falcon-headed man, was connected with the sky and the living king. Anubis, represented as a jackal or jackal-headed figure, protected cemeteries and embalming. Thoth, often shown with the head of an ibis, was associated with writing, knowledge, calculation, and the moon. Hathor was a goddess of love, music, joy, motherhood, and the sky. Bastet became closely associated with cats, protection, and the household. Ptah was a creator god and patron of craftspeople. Sekhmet, shown as a lioness-headed woman, represented destructive power, but also healing. These simple descriptions cannot contain the full meaning of any deity. A god could have many names, forms, family relationships, local traditions, and roles. Deities could merge with one another, or take on new importance as political centers changed. Creation stories also varied. At Heliopolis, a tradition described the creator Atum and generations of gods who formed the ordered world. At Memphis, Ptah created through heart and speech. At Hermopolis, a group of primeval deities represented the conditions before creation. These accounts did not necessarily cancel one another. Egyptian religious thought often allowed multiple symbolic explanations. At the center of state religion were temples. A temple was considered the house of a god. Its deepest sanctuary contained a sacred image, usually hidden from the public. Priests performed daily rituals on behalf of the pharaoh, even when the king was far away. In the morning, the sanctuary was opened. The divine image might be washed, clothed, anointed, and presented with food, drink, incense, and other offerings. Sacred words were spoken. The ritual maintained the relationship between the human and divine worlds. After the ceremony, food offerings could be redistributed among temple personnel. Temples were therefore not only religious buildings, they were major economic institutions, with land, workshops, livestock, storage, employees, and political influence. Most people did not enter the innermost sanctuary. They encountered the gods through festivals, processions, local shrines, household worship, amulets, dreams, prayers, and requests for help. During a festival, a divine image could be carried in a shrine-shaped boat from the temple, allowing crowds to see the procession. People asked gods for healing, children, protection, justice, and guidance. They also honored deceased relatives and local spirits. Household religion could involve small figures, offering places, protective images, and deities connected with childbirth and the home, such as Bes and Taweret. Magic was not separate from religion or medicine. The Egyptian word, often translated as magic, referred to a power that the gods themselves used and that humans could apply through ritual knowledge. Protective spells, amulets, spoken formulas, and written texts were part of practical life. A mother might use a protective charm for a child. A doctor might combine medicine with an incantation. A traveler might carry an amulet. A person bitten by a snake or threatened by a crocodile might call on mythic events in which a god overcame a similar danger. The principle of Ma'at joined religion with ethics and society. The gods upheld order, and human beings were expected to live within it. Tomb texts and wisdom literature praise honesty, fairness, self-control, proper speech, care for the vulnerable, and respect for social obligations. The opposite of ma'at was disorder, sometimes expressed through the concept of isfet. The pharaoh's ritual defeat of enemies symbolized the containment of chaos. Temple scenes repeat this ideal endlessly. The king stands firm, the gods approve, and the world remains in balance. Yet religion was not only solemn. Festivals included music, food, drink, processions, and celebration. Hathor could be honored with joyful music. The annual festival of Opet carried sacred images from Karnak to Luxor. At other festivals, people visited family tombs, shared meals, and remembered the dead. The Egyptians lived in a world filled with divine presence. Sunrise was not merely a physical event, it was renewal. The Nile flood was not merely water, it belonged to a sacred order. The temple was not merely stone, it was a place where creation was maintained. To sleep beneath the Egyptian sky, perhaps with the river nearby and the stars clear above the desert, was to rest inside a cosmos understood through story, ritual, and repetition. Each dawn renewed the world. Each offering restored a relationship. Each spoken name resisted forgetting. Death held a central place in ancient Egyptian culture, but this does not mean that Egyptians were obsessed with death in a gloomy way. Their preparations for burial grew from a strong desire for life to continue. They believed that a human being had several spiritual aspects. Modern translations use terms such as Ka, Ba, and Ak, though no single English word captures them perfectly. The Ka was connected with life force and required nourishment. The Ba was a mobile aspect of personality, often shown as a human-headed bird. The transformed, affective spirit could exist among the gods and the blessed dead. For these aspects to survive and remain connected, the body and identity of the deceased needed protection. The person's name, image, tomb, offerings, and correct rituals all mattered. In the earliest periods, bodies buried in shallow desert graves could dry naturally in the hot sand. As burial practices became more elaborate and bodies were placed in coffins and chambers, embalmers developed artificial methods of preservation. Mummification changed over time and depended on wealth and period. In the most elaborate New Kingdom process, internal organs were removed. The brain could be extracted through the nose. The heart was usually left in place because it was considered important for identity and judgment. The body was dried using natron, a naturally occurring salt mixture. After many days, it was cleaned, treated with oils and resins, packed, or shaped, and wrapped in layers of linen. Amulets could be placed among the bandages. Priests performed rituals, including the opening of the mouth ceremony, intended to restore the deceased's ability to breathe, speak, eat, see, and act in the next world. The liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines could be preserved separately in canopic containers or returned to the body in later periods. The containers were associated with the 4 sons of Horus and protected by goddesses. The finished mummy was placed in 1 or more coffins. Wealthy burials might include nested coffins, a stone sarcophagus, jewelry, masks, furniture, clothing, food, tools, games, statues, and other goods. The exact contents varied greatly. Poorer people could not afford royal or elite treatment. Some received simpler wrapping or burial in the desert. Yet the hope for continued existence was not limited only to kings. Over time, funerary texts and practices spread through wider levels of society. Tombs were built on the western side of the Nile in many regions, because the west, where the sun set, was associated with death. The dead entered a hidden realm, just as the sun disappeared below the horizon, and hoped to rise again. The tomb had 2 connected purposes. It protected the body and burial equipment, and it provided a place where offerings could be made. A chapel might contain a false door, through which the spirit could receive food and drink. Images of bread, beer, meat, vegetables, clothing, servants, fields, and workshops helped make those things eternally available. Statues offered another home for the spirit if the body was damaged. The deceased's name was repeated in inscriptions. To erase a name or destroy an image was therefore a serious attack on continued existence. Funerary literature developed across centuries. The pyramid texts were carved inside royal pyramids of the late Old Kingdom. The coffin texts appeared on non-royal coffins in the Middle Kingdom. Later, collections of spells written on papyrus became known as the Book of the Dead, though the ancient title can be translated as Coming Forth by Day. These texts offered knowledge for the journey. They named gates and guardians, protected against dangers, allowed movement, and helped the deceased join the gods. There was no single standard copy containing every spell. People selected different combinations according to time, place, preference, and cost. One of the best-known scenes shows the judgment of the dead. The heart of the deceased is weighed against the feather of Ma'at. Anubis attends the scales. Thoth records the result. Osiris presides over the judgment. Nearby waits a fearsome creature called Ammit, combining parts of a crocodile, lion, and hippopotamus, ready to consume a heart that fails. The deceased also recites statements often called the negative confession, denying wrongdoing such as theft, murder, deceit, and cruelty. The scene expresses the idea that entry into a blessed afterlife depended not only on ritual knowledge, but on moral order. If justified, the deceased could enter an ideal realm, sometimes called the Field of Reeds. It resembled a perfected Egypt, with fertile land, waterways, crops, family, and peaceful work. Small figures called shabtis could be placed in tombs to perform labor on behalf of the dead if required. The Egyptians knew that tombs could be robbed. Protective curses sometimes warned intruders, but practical measures such as hidden chambers, sealed doors, guards, and remote valleys were also used. None was completely successful. During periods of disorder, royal mummies were moved by priests to secret caches. The goal may have been to protect them from further theft and desecration. Ironically, these ancient rescue efforts helped preserve several famous rulers for modern discovery. Today, a mummy can appear in a museum case, separated from the tomb, ritual, family, and beliefs that once surrounded it. It is easy to see only an object, but each mummy was a person. Someone knew that face in life. Someone prepared the burial. Someone spoke the name. The linen, resin, amulets, prayers, and painted eyes were acts of care, fear, faith, status, memory, and hope. They were attempts to answer the oldest human question: how can what we love continue when a life has ended? For centuries after the old temples fell silent, no one could fully read the hieroglyphs carved across their walls. Travelers could see birds, eyes, snakes, seated figures, hands, crowns, tools, plants, and mysterious signs. But the language behind them had been forgotten. The word hieroglyph comes from Greek words meaning sacred carvings. The Egyptians themselves used an expression that can be translated as the words of the gods. Hieroglyphic writing appeared near the beginning of Egyptian civilization and remained in use, especially for monuments and religious purposes, for more than 3,000 years. It was a flexible and visually beautiful system. Some signs represented sounds. A sign could stand for one consonant, a combination of consonants, or an entire word. Other signs, called determinatives by modern scholars, were placed at the end of words to help indicate meaning. A picture of a man might clarify that a word concerned a person. A pair of walking legs might suggest movement. Hieroglyphs could be written from right to left or left to right, and sometimes in vertical columns. To know where to begin, a reader looks at the direction faced by human and animal signs. They usually face toward the start of the line. The system contained hundreds of signs. National Geographic's children's summaries often describe more than 700 hieroglyphs, though the number varied over time and could be larger in later periods. Learning them required dedication. Hieroglyphs were ideal for temple walls, tombs, statues, stelae, and royal monuments. Their arrangement was part language and part design. Signs were grouped to create balanced blocks, fitting the available space. An inscription could therefore be read and admired as an image. For faster everyday writing, scribes used cursive scripts. Hieratic was a flowing form used on papyrus and other surfaces for administration, literature, religion, mathematics, and correspondence. Later, demotic developed as an even more abbreviated script for business, legal, and daily documents. The Egyptian language itself changed through time. Scholars identify stages such as Old Egyptian, Middle Egyptian, Late Egyptian, Demotic, and Coptic. Middle Egyptian remained a respected classical written language long after ordinary speech had changed, much as later cultures preserved older languages in religion and scholarship. Scribal education involved copying. Students practiced signs, vocabulary, model letters, calculations, and classic texts. Some exercises survive on pottery fragments and limestone flakes. A teacher might correct a student's work in red ink. Texts praise the scribal profession. One famous teaching contrasts the clean, secure life of a scribe with the hardships of other occupations. The description is clearly persuasive rather than neutral, perhaps intended to encourage a reluctant student. Even so, it shows the value placed on literacy. Writing allowed the state to function across distance and time. Taxes could be recorded, royal orders could travel, temple offerings could be counted, land could be measured after floods, legal agreements could be preserved. The names of workers, soldiers, priests, and officials could survive beyond memory. Writing also opened space for imagination. Egyptian literature includes tales of adventure, shipwreck, magic, court intrigue, eloquent peasants, doomed princes, gods, ghosts, and travelers. Wisdom texts give advice about speech, friendship, authority, generosity, and self-control. Love poems compare the beloved to flowers, fruit, fragrance, and the beauty of the river landscape. Religious texts guided ritual and the afterlife. Medical papyri listed symptoms and treatments. Mathematical papyri presented problems in arithmetic, geometry, distribution, and measurement. Letters carried complaints, affection, instructions, and news. A short note written by an ordinary person can sometimes feel closer than a royal inscription. The royal text declares eternal victory. The personal letter asks why no one has written back. The loss of hieroglyphic literacy was gradual. As Greek, Roman, and Christian cultures transformed Egypt, knowledge of the old script became limited. The last known dated hieroglyphic inscription was carved at Philae in the late 4th century of the Common Era. For many centuries, Europeans and others guessed that each hieroglyph was a purely symbolic picture containing hidden wisdom. Some signs do carry symbolic meaning, but the script also records the sounds and grammar of a real language. Without recognizing that fact, decipherment was impossible. The turning point came from a stone found in 1799 during Napoleon's campaign in Egypt. Soldiers working near the town of Rashid, known in Europe as Rosetta, uncovered a dark stone slab bearing the same decree in 3 scripts: hieroglyphic, Demotic, and ancient Greek. The decree had been issued in 196, before the Common Era, during the reign of Ptolemy V. Because scholars could read Greek, they had a path toward the Egyptian texts. The stone did not instantly reveal every secret. Decipherment required years of comparison, debate, and insight. Thomas Young made important progress, especially with names written in oval frames called cartouches. Jean-François Champollion, who knew Coptic, recognized that hieroglyphs represented sounds as well as ideas. In 1822, he announced the breakthrough that opened the way to reading ancient Egyptian inscriptions. Coptic was essential because it preserved the final stage of the Egyptian language. Words spoken in ancient Egypt had not vanished entirely. They had changed and survived within the language of Egyptian Christians. Once the script could be read, temple walls and papyri became voices. King lists could be compared. Religious ideas could be studied in their own words. Names, once dismissed as decoration, became historical people. The Rosetta Stone is now in the British Museum, and Egypt has repeatedly requested its return. Whatever one thinks about its modern location, its role in decipherment remains profound. A stone created to proclaim royal legitimacy became, 2,000 years later, a key to an entire civilization. You may imagine the first moment when a repeated royal name stopped being a pattern and became readable speech. The carved bird, reed, hand, and sun were no longer silent. The old walls had begun to speak again. Ancient Egyptian art is immediately recognizable. A face appears in profile, while the eye is shown from the front. Shoulders face the viewer, but the waist and legs turn sideways. Important people are larger than servants or enemies. Figures stand in orderly rows, and scenes are divided into registers. These conventions were not the result of artists being unable to observe nature. Egyptian sculptors and painters could represent animals, plants, movement, and human detail with extraordinary sensitivity. The formal style served a purpose. It showed each part of a figure from what was considered its clearest and most characteristic angle. The goal was not always to capture one passing instant. Art helped establish an enduring reality. A tomb scene of food production could ensure abundance for the deceased. An image of the king offering to a god made the ritual permanently present. A statue gave identity, a stable physical home. Artists followed proportional systems. Guides helped organize the human figure. Styles shifted over thousands of years, but the commitment to clarity, order, and symbolic meaning remained strong. Color had associations. Black could represent fertile soil and regeneration. Green suggested growth and life. Red could signify vitality, desert, danger, or power. Gold was linked with the flesh of the gods and the brilliance of the sun. Blue evoked sky, water, and divinity. Paint was made from minerals and other materials. Surfaces were prepared with plaster. Artists outlined figures, added color, and refined details. In some tombs, unfinished walls reveal the stages of work. Red preliminary sketches, corrections in black, carved outlines, and painted surfaces. Sculpture ranged from tiny amulets to colossal statues. Hard stones such as granite and diorite could be worked with great patience. Softer limestone allowed finer carving. Wood, metal, clay, ivory, and faience were also used. Royal statues present the pharaoh as youthful, strong, calm, and eternal. Yet some periods favored more individualized features. Middle Kingdom portraits can show heavy eyelids, lines, or an expression of burden. Amarna art introduced a radically different royal image. Private statues sometimes portray age, body shape, or personality more directly. Egyptian architecture also joined function with cosmic meaning. Temples were arranged as a journey from the outside world toward the hidden sanctuary. A visitor might approach between rows of sphinxes, pass through a massive gateway called a pylon, enter open courts, move into columned halls, and finally reach smaller, darker rooms. As one moved inward, floors could rise and ceilings become lower. Light diminished. The sanctuary was secluded, like the first mound of creation emerging from primeval waters. Sections were shaped and decorated to resemble plants such as papyrus, lotus, and palm. Ceilings could be painted deep blue with stars. Temple walls showed gods, offerings, festivals, royal victories, and ritual scenes. At Karnak, generations of rulers expanded the complex over many centuries. Its great hypostyle hall contains a forest of enormous columns. Standing among them, a person would have felt surrounded by stone forms, inspired by the marshes from which creation was believed to have emerged. Obelisks were tall, tapering stone monuments, topped by a small pyramid shape. They were associated with the sun. Many were cut from granite at Aswan, transported by river, and raised in temple courts. Several were later carried to Rome, Paris, London, New York, and other cities. An unfinished obelisk still lies in a quarry at Aswan. Cracks caused workers to abandon it. Because it remains attached to the bedrock, it offers clues about quarrying methods and the enormous ambition of ancient stoneworkers. Ordinary buildings were made mainly from mud brick, but temples and tombs intended for eternity were built in stone. This difference explains why modern visitors see a landscape of monuments to gods and the dead, while most homes, markets, and workshops have disappeared. The great temples were once more colorful than they appear today. Reliefs and columns were painted. Demonic users moved above pylons. Metal-covered doors shone. Incense, music, ritual speech, and crowds filled festival days. What now seems like quiet stone was once an active place. Tomb decoration also varied. Old Kingdom mastabas often contain scenes of farming, fishing, crafts, and food preparation carved in low relief. Middle Kingdom tombs may show regional styles and detailed daily activity. New Kingdom tombs at Thebes are famous for bright painted scenes, banquets, gardens, work, offerings, and journeys to the afterlife. Artisans themselves rarely signed works in the modern sense, yet their skill is visible everywhere. At Deir el-Medina, practice drawings and humorous sketches survive. Animals imitate human behavior. A cat serves a mouse. A mouse rides in a chariot. These images reveal playfulness beyond formal temple art. Beauty in ancient Egypt was not separated from effectiveness. A beautifully made object worked better in ritual because it was complete, ordered, and appropriate. A well-proportioned statue, a carefully written spell, and a correctly aligned temple all participated in ma'at. Even small objects carried this care. A cosmetic spoon might be carved as a swimming girl holding a container. A jewelry clasp might take the form of a protective god. A wooden headrest might be shaped with elegance, though it served the practical purpose of supporting the neck during sleep. Perhaps an Egyptian resting on such a headrest, inside a cool mud brick room, heard distant music from a festival or the quiet movement of the river. Around that sleeper were objects whose shapes connected daily comfort with protection, identity, and the ordered world. The achievements of ancient Egyptian builders depended on practical knowledge accumulated over generations. They measured land, calculated quantities, observed the sky, treated injuries, made glass and faience, built boats, moved stone, and managed large workforces. Their mathematics used a decimal system based on units of 10. Numbers were written with repeated signs for ones, tens, hundreds, thousands, and larger values. Fractions were usually expressed as sums of unit fractions, meaning fractions with 1 as the numerator, with some special exceptions. Surviving mathematical papyri present problems and worked solutions. Scribes calculated areas of fields, volumes of granaries, slopes, distributions of bread and beer, and the labor or materials needed for construction. Their methods were practical, though they also show abstract reasoning. The Egyptian term, now called seked, described the horizontal movement for a given vertical rise and was used in expressing the slope of pyramids. Surveyors used ropes, rods, levels, plumb lines, squares, and sighting tools. After the Nile flood altered field boundaries, officials could remeasure land for taxation and ownership. The Greek word geometry means measurement of the earth, and later writers connected Egyptian surveying with the development of geometry, though mathematical knowledge grew in many ancient cultures. The Egyptians observed the sky carefully. Stars helped organize the night and religious calendar. The annual appearance of Sirius near the time of the Nile flood became important. The civil calendar had 12 months of 30 days, divided into 3 seasons, plus 5 additional days, creating a year of 365 days. Because the calendar did not include a leap day, it slowly shifted in relation to the solar year. Still, it was a remarkably useful administrative system. Time during the day could be measured with shadow clocks or sundials, and at night with water clocks and observations of stars. Priests and astronomers tracked celestial movements for ritual and calendar purposes. Medicine combined careful observation with religious and magical practice. Surviving papyri show diagnoses, treatments, and classifications of injuries and diseases. The Edwin Smith Papyrus is especially notable for its organized descriptions of wounds and trauma, moving through examination, diagnosis, and recommended treatment. A physician might examine a wound, feel a pulse, observe movement, and decide whether a case was treatable, uncertain, or untreatable. The Immerse papyrus contains remedies for a wide range of conditions. Treatments used honey, linen, oils, plants, minerals, and animal substances. Honey has antibacterial properties, although ancient explanations differed from modern science. Splints and bandages were used. Dentists and specialists are mentioned, though medical titles can be difficult to interpret. Not every remedy was effective, and some were dangerous by modern standards. Illness could be explained through physical causes, divine influence, hostile forces, or a combination. An incantation and a practical treatment might be applied together without contradiction. Mummification gave embalmers detailed familiarity with the body, but Egyptian medical understanding of internal function was limited. The heart was regarded as the center of thought, emotion, and identity. The brain, though known as an organ, did not receive the same importance. Dental disease was common. Sand and stone particles in bread wore down teeth. Abscesses could be painful and life-threatening. Parasites and infections spread through water and close contact. Workers suffered fractures, joint damage, and strain. Yet many people survived serious injuries, as healed bones show. Care within families and communities must have been important, even when written records are absent. Egyptian craftspeople developed faience long before the Old Kingdom. It was made mainly from ground silica, with alkaline materials and colorants, often producing brilliant blue or green surfaces. Beads, tiles, amulets, cups, and small figures were formed from it. Glassmaking became highly developed, especially in the New Kingdom. Glass could imitate precious stones and was used for vessels, inlays, beads, and jewelry. Workshops controlled heat and chemical mixtures with skill, even if their explanations were not expressed in modern scientific terms. Metal workers used copper, bronze, gold, silver, electrum, and later iron. Gold was abundant in Nubia and the eastern desert, and could be hammered, cast, joined, and polished. Tutankhamun's burial objects demonstrate extraordinary metalwork, inlay, woodworking, and surface decoration. Stoneworkers used copper chisels, stone pounders, abrasives, drills, saws, and patient labor. Hard granite could be shaped with harder hammerstones, and sand used as an abrasive. The precision of finished surfaces came from repeated measurement and finishing, rather than mysterious lost powers. Ancient Egyptian technology was often simple in individual tools and sophisticated in organization. A rope, lever, sledge, ramp, plumb line, and wooden frame may seem basic. Used by trained teams with planning and abundant labor, they could produce monuments of astonishing scale. Knowledge lived not only in written formulas, but in bodies and communities. A master craftsperson knew how stone sounded when struck correctly. A sailor read wind and current. A farmer recognized soil and water. A physician observed temperature and movement. A scribe knew the expected form of a calculation. Much of that knowledge was never written down. It passed from experienced hands to younger hands, generation after generation, as quietly as the Nile passed from one bend to the next. Egypt was protected by deserts, but it was never isolated. Trade and migration connected the Nile Valley with Africa, the Mediterranean, Western Asia, and the Red Sea. To the south lay Nubia and Kush, regions linked with gold, cattle, ivory, ebony, incense, animal skins, and trade routes from deeper in Africa. Relations shifted between trade, diplomacy, intermarriage, military conflict, and occupation. The Egyptians built forts in Nubia and sometimes controlled territory far south of the traditional border. Nubian archers served in Egyptian armies. Nubian styles and people appear in Egyptian art, though official scenes often used stereotypes to express foreignness and royal domination. To the northeast, routes crossed the Sinai toward the Levant. Egypt obtained timber, oils, wine, silver, and manufactured goods. Cedar from Lebanon was prized for ships, doors, coffins, and monumental construction. The Sinai also contained copper and turquoise mines. Expeditions traveled with soldiers, miners, craftspeople, scribes, and supplies. Inscriptions left in mining regions record royal names and journeys. Across the Red Sea lay routes toward Punt. Egyptian texts praise Punt for incense, myrrh trees, ebony, ivory, gold, and exotic animals. Hatshepsut's expedition is the best known, but contact existed at other times as well. Western deserts contained oases that supported settlements and served as stations on long routes. The eastern desert held quarries and mineral resources. Granite came from Aswan. Fine limestone came from places such as Tura. Alabaster, sandstone, basalt, diorite, and other stones were selected for different purposes. Quarry expeditions could be enormous undertakings. Workers needed water, food, shelter, tools, transport animals, and protection. Roads and way stations crossed landscapes where survival depended on planning. Boats made Egypt's long geography manageable. Early craft could be formed from bundles of reeds. Wooden boats later ranged from fishing vessels to cargo ships and ceremonial craft. A boat's hull was built from planks fitted and tied together in methods suited to available timber. River vessels often had shallow drafts. Sails and oars allowed movement in different conditions. Royal boat burials reveal the sacred importance of sailing. Near the Great Pyramid, archaeologists found a disassembled wooden ship in a sealed pit. The vessel, often called Khufu's ship or the solar boat, was more than 100 feet long. Its timbers could be reassembled because the parts and rope system had survived. Its exact use before burial remains discussed. It may have carried the king's body, served ceremonial functions, or symbolized the pharaoh's journey with the sun god. Whatever its role, it demonstrates advanced woodworking and ship construction during the Old Kingdom. Sea-going voyages were possible as well. Egyptians travelled along the Mediterranean and Red Sea coasts. The famous reliefs from the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut show large ships sailing to Punt with crews, rigging, and cargo. Trade was not simply peaceful exchange. Goods could arrive as taxes, tribute, diplomatic gifts, payment, booty, or market transactions. Royal inscriptions often presented foreign products as tribute, proving Egypt's superiority. Letters between great kings, however, reveal rulers bargaining over gold, marriages, and gifts as near equals. The Amarna letters show that royal gift exchange had rules and expectations. One king complained that another had sent too little. Marriage negotiations involved status and wealth. Gold from Egypt was especially valued by foreign courts. Merchants and sailors lived at the meeting points between cultures. Foreign communities settled in Egypt. Egyptian objects travelled abroad. Gods, words, artistic forms, plants, technologies, and customs moved with people. The Hyksos period itself grew from this connected world. Western Asian communities had lived in the Delta before Hyksos kings came to power. Later, Greek traders and soldiers became part of Egyptian society. Under the Ptolemies and Romans, Alexandria linked the Nile with Mediterranean and Indian Ocean trade. Even the materials in a single royal object could tell a story of distance. Gold might come from Nubia. Lapis lazuli ultimately came from far beyond Egypt, in the region of modern Afghanistan, moving through long exchange networks. Cedar came from Lebanon. Silver was imported. Turquoise came from Sinai. The finished object, made in an Egyptian workshop, contained a map of the ancient world. A quiet riverboat carrying grain between villages belonged to the same broad system as a royal ship bringing incense from a distant shore. One sustained daily life. The other displayed prestige and power. Both depended on water, wind, wood, rope, skill, and trust. Modern knowledge of ancient Egypt has grown through discoveries made in deserts, tombs, temples, villages, riverbanks, museum collections, and laboratories. Archaeology is often remembered through dramatic moments, but most understanding comes from patient work. Recording layers, reading fragments, comparing objects, preserving damaged material, and reconsidering old conclusions. The pyramids at Giza were never truly lost. They remained visible through antiquity and the medieval period, although their polished outer stones were largely removed. Visitors entered them, wrote about them, measured them, and invented stories about them. Modern excavation revealed that the Giza Plateau was not only a place of 3 isolated monuments. It contained temples, cemeteries, roads, boat pits, quarries, workshops, and settlements. Evidence of workers' lives helped replace the popular image of mysterious monuments built by nameless enslaved masses with a more complex picture of organized crews, specialists, and supporting communities. Khufu's ship was discovered in 1954 in a sealed pit near the Great Pyramid. Its wooden pieces had rested there for more than 4,000 years. Reconstructing the vessel required years of careful study. The result was a graceful, full-sized ship whose form had survived in darkness, while kingdoms, languages, and empires changed above it. Tutankhamun's tomb remains the most famous Egyptian discovery, but it was not the only nearly intact royal burial. At Tanis in the Nile Delta, the French Egyptologist Pierre Montet excavated royal tombs around the beginning of the Second World War. There he found the burial of Susenes I, a pharaoh of the 21st dynasty. Susenes is sometimes called the Silver Pharaoh because his coffin was made from silver. In ancient Egypt, silver could be rarer than gold because it had to be imported. The burial also included a gold mask and other precious objects. The discovery received less international attention than Tutankhamun's tomb, partly because the world was entering war. Yet it changed assumptions about the wealth of Egypt during the Third Intermediate Period. Historians had often imagined that age mainly as one of decline. The splendor of the Tanis burials showed that powerful royal and religious centers still possessed remarkable resources. The humid conditions of the delta had damaged many organic materials, so the tomb did not preserve the same crowded world of wood, cloth, and furniture found with Tutankhamun. Archaeology is always shaped by environment. Dry desert tombs preserve materials that would disappear elsewhere. The search for Hatshepsut's mummy was another long investigation. Her tomb and sarcophagus had been found, but the body was missing. In a separate tomb, archaeologists found 2 female mummies. One coffin was associated with Hatshepsut's wet nurse. In 2007, researchers announced that one of the unidentified mummies was Hatshepsut. A tooth found in a container holding embalmed organs appeared to fit a missing space in the mummy's jaw, and other evidence supported the identification. The case illustrates both the possibilities and limits of modern analysis. Identification depends on the quality of the chain of evidence, and later research may refine it. Hatshepsut had faced an ancient attempt to reduce her memory. Implements and names were removed from some monuments after her reign. For centuries, her historical place was uncertain. Reading inscriptions restored her story, and the possible identification of her body added another human connection to the ruler who built at Deir el-Bahri. Ramses II's mummy also survived because priests moved it to a hidden cache. In 1881, a collection of royal mummies was revealed at Deir el-Bahri. The cache contained kings, queens, and other members of royal families who had been reburied for protection. The mummies had labels and reburial records that helped identify them. Yet the cache also showed the scale of ancient tomb robbery. Priests had opened royal burials, rewrapped damaged bodies, moved funerary objects, and placed the dead together in safer hiding places. When Ramses's mummy showed deterioration in the 20th century, it was transported to France for examination and treatment. Scientists studied the body and addressed fungal growth. This combination of respect, science, politics, and public fascination continues to shape how royal remains are handled. In the Bahariya oasis, archaeologists uncovered a large cemetery in the 1990s that became known as the Valley of the Golden Mummies. The burials dated mainly to the Greco-Roman period. Some bodies had gilded masks or decorated coverings, while others were buried more simply. The differences reflected social class and access to resources. The cemetery may contain thousands of burials, showing how Egyptian funerary traditions continued and changed under Greek and Roman rule. A person could live in a world influenced by Rome and Alexandria, while still seeking preservation through mummification and traditional symbols. In Alexandria, beneath the streets of the modern city, archaeologists announced the discovery of remains associated with a temple of Bastet, built during the Ptolemaic period. Hundreds of cat statues found in the area reflected the continuing importance of the goddess and of sacred animals, even under a Greek-speaking royal dynasty. The city of Alexandria creates special challenges for archaeology. The ancient metropolis lies beneath modern buildings and along a coast altered by earthquakes, subsidence, and the sea. Underwater archaeologists have explored submerged remains in the harbour, including architectural fragments and statues. Not all important discoveries involve gold or royal names. At Deir el-Medina, discarded notes reveal absent workers, household disputes, and supply problems. At ancient settlements, animal bones and plant remains reconstruct diet. In latrines and mummies, traces of parasites reveal disease. In workshops, Broken tools show methods of production. A simple pair of sandals can tell us about leatherworking and wear. A child's toy can reveal affection and play. A repaired pottery jar shows that an ordinary household valued an object enough to mend it. A loaf of bread, dried in a tomb, preserves grain and baking methods. Archaeology has also corrected romantic mistakes. Early excavators sometimes cleared sites quickly, seeking statues, inscriptions, and treasure, while discarding ordinary material. Modern methods place greater value on context. The exact location of an object, the soil around it, and its relationship to other remains may matter more than its beauty. Scientific tools have expanded the field. Radiocarbon dating helps estimate age. Relic can examine wrapped mummies without fully unwrapping them. Chemical analysis can identify pigments, resins, food, and trade materials. Root sensing and satellite photography can locate buried structures. Muon imaging has been used to investigate hidden spaces within the Great Pyramid. These methods do not eliminate uncertainty. They create new evidence, which still requires interpretation. A void inside a pyramid may be a chamber, a construction space, or a stress-relieving feature. A substance in a vessel may have several possible uses. A DNA sample may be contaminated or too limited for broad conclusions. Good archaeology moves carefully. It distinguishes what is known, what is probable, and what remains possible. Egypt continues to produce discoveries because so much remains beneath the ground. New tombs, workshops, statues, papyri, cemeteries, and parts of cities are reported regularly. Some finds answer old questions. Others create new ones. Perhaps this is one reason ancient Egypt remains so compelling. Its monuments appear solid and permanent, yet our understanding of the people who made them is always changing. The legacy of ancient Egypt reaches far beyond the borders of the Nile Valley. The Greeks and Romans admired Egyptian religion, science, art, and antiquity. Greek writers visited temples and recorded stories, though their accounts mixed observation with misunderstanding. Egyptian gods such as Isis were worshipped across the Roman world. Obelisks were transported to Rome as symbols of conquest and fascination. Later, knowledge of the old scripts disappeared, but the monuments remained. Medieval travelers approached the pyramids with legends. Some imagined them as the granaries of the biblical Joseph. Others searched for hidden wisdom or treasure. During the Renaissance and early modern period, European interest in Egyptian objects grew. Hieroglyphs were interpreted as symbolic mysteries. Consort mummies, statues, papyri, and amulets. Napoleon's campaign in Egypt at the end of the 18th century was a military invasion, but it also included scholars, artists, engineers, and scientists who documented monuments, plants, animals, geography, and society. Their large publication helped create intense European interest in Egypt. The decipherment of hieroglyphs transformed that fascination into the modern field of Egyptology. Scholars could compare texts with archaeology and reconstruct dynasties, religion, literature, administration, and daily life. Egyptology also developed within the unequal political world of European imperialism. Foreign expeditions removed enormous numbers of objects. Museums in Britain, France, Germany, Italy, the United States, and elsewhere built major collections. Agreements were often made under colonial or semi-colonial conditions that are now questioned. Modern Egypt has sought the return of important antiquities and greater control over its heritage. Debates about ownership continue around objects such as the Rosetta Stone, the bust of Nefertiti, temple reliefs, statues, and manuscripts. Preservation also creates difficult choices. Tomb paintings can be damaged by humidity and carbon dioxide from visitors. Tourism supports local and national economies, but can place pressure on fragile sites. Rising groundwater, pollution, city growth, looting, conflict, and climate change threaten remains. Conservation, therefore, tries to balance access with survival. Some tombs are closed or visited in rotation. Replicas may allow people to experience a space without harming the original. Digital recording preserves details, although no digital copy can completely replace the material monument. Ancient Egypt influenced modern architecture and design. Egyptian motifs appeared in European art after Napoleon's campaign, and again after the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb. Obelisks, sphinxes, lotus columns, winged sun discs, scarabs, and geometric patterns entered furniture, jewelry, theatres, cemeteries, and Art Deco design. Movies and novels created their own Egypt of curses, secret chambers, mummies, and hidden treasure. These stories can be entertaining, but they often tell us more about modern hopes and fears than about ancient beliefs. The actual civilization is richer than the fantasy. It includes tax records and love poetry, irrigation and perfume, labor disputes and sacred festivals, medical observation and magical protection, international diplomacy, and village gossip. Its long duration also changes our sense of time. Cleopatra lived closer to our own age than to the builders of the Great Pyramid. When she ruled, the pyramids were already ancient by more than 2,000 years. Egyptians of the New Kingdom looked back at Old Kingdom monuments, much as later societies look back at distant antiquity. They restored old temples, copied ancient texts, visited pyramids, and sometimes reused the stone or burial spaces of earlier generations. Ancient Egypt was never frozen. Language changed. Art changed. Capitals moved. Gods rose in importance or merged with others. Foreign people settled in the country, and Egyptians traveled abroad. The civilization remained recognizable because it continually adapted while preserving powerful ideas about kingship, divine order, the Nile, and life after death. Its achievements were not magical and not the work of beings from another world. They were human achievements. That fact makes them more extraordinary, not less. People observed the river and learned its patterns. Administrators developed systems for storing grain and directing work. Craftspeople spent lifetimes mastering stone, wood, metal, pigment, linen, and glass. Sailors crossed difficult waters. Scribes preserved language. Farmers produced the surplus on which palaces and temples depended. The monuments can make us focus on kings, but civilization is always collective. Khufu ordered a pyramid, yet thousands of people planned, transported, cooked, measured, cut, hauled, repaired, and recorded. Hatshepsut sent ships to Punt, yet sailors and merchants faced the journey. Ramses placed his image at Abu Simbel, yet stoneworkers entered the mountain and shaped every surface. The past also survives through accidents. Tutankhamun became famous because debris concealed his tomb. Royal mummies survived because ancient priests moved them. Papyrus survived because the climate was dry. A broken stone became useful because it repeated a text in Greek and Egyptian scripts. History depends on survival, and survival is uneven. We know more about elite tombs than poor homes. We know the names of kings more often than the names of builders. We see official victories more clearly than private doubts. To study ancient Egypt well is therefore to listen for both the loud and quiet voices. The loud voice is carved on a temple pylon. The king is mighty. The gods are pleased. Order is eternal. The quiet voice is scratched on a piece of pottery. Please send grain. I am unwell. Do not forget me. Both belong to Egypt. Now let us return once more to the Nile. The river moves north, as it did when the first farmers settled beside it. Modern dams have changed the ancient flood cycle, and modern cities now fill places where villages, fields, temples, and palaces once stood. Yet the geography still explains the beginning of the story. On either side is the desert. Along the water is life. In the earliest ages, communities learned to grow grain and keep animals. They traded, built villages, decorated pottery, and buried their dead with care. Upper and Lower Egypt came together under one king, and the idea of the two lands shaped a civilization. The first dynasties established royal power and administration. The Old Kingdom raised the Step Pyramid and the monuments of Giza. Kings imagined stone tombs that would last forever, and workers turned those ideas into measured blocks beneath the sun. When central power weakened, Egypt divided. Then it reunited in the Middle Kingdom, renewed by agriculture, trade, fortresses, literature, and the promise of an afterlife that extended beyond royalty. The Hyksos ruled in the north, and Theban kings drove them out. The new kingdom expanded into an empire. Hatshepsut sent ships to Punt. Thutmose III campaigned in Western Asia. Akhenaten raised the Aten and built a new capital. Tutankhamun restored older worship and entered a small tomb that would make him famous thousands of years later. Ramses II built at Abu Simbel and fought the Hittites before accepting peace. Later rulers faced invasion, economic strain, rivalry, and the loss of empire. Libyan, Nubian, Assyrian, Persian, Greek, and Roman powers entered Egypt. Some conquered, some settled, and many adopted Egyptian royal forms. The Ptolemies built temples and governed from Alexandria. Cleopatra VII struggled in the shadow of Rome. After her death, Egypt became a Roman province. Through all these periods, ordinary people continued to plant, harvest, weave, bake, brew, sail, raise children, honor gods, bury relatives, and tell stories. The ancient Egyptian world was filled with more than 2,000 divine names and forms. Sunlight, animals, river water, kingship, motherhood, writing, music, death, healing, and justice could all reveal sacred power. The temples maintained creation through daily ritual. The tombs protected memory. Mummification preserved the body. Funerary texts guided the dead through darkness toward renewed life. Hieroglyphs recorded names and offerings in balanced lines. Scribes wrote faster scripts on papyrus and broken pottery. When the old writing was forgotten, the Rosetta Stone and the work of modern scholars made it readable again. Artists created a visual language of order, Architects aligned temples, raised obelisks, filled halls with columns, and carved sanctuaries into mountains. Physicians examined wounds and prescribed treatments. Mathematicians measured fields and calculated supplies. Sailors carried stone, grain, timber, incense, soldiers, and royal messages. Archaeologists later found ships beneath the ground, kings hidden in caches, gold masks in sealed rooms, a silver coffin in the delta, and thousands of ordinary objects that brought daily life into view. The story is very long, but it is not distant in every way. An ancient parent worried about a child. A student struggled with writing. A worker waited for wages. A farmer watched the river level. A sailor looked for wind. A family remembered someone who had died. The forms of their world were different, yet the feelings beneath them may not have been entirely unfamiliar. Perhaps that is why a footprint, a letter, a worn sandal, or a simple bowl can be as moving as a golden treasure. The small object has crossed a space of thousands of years. Someone once held it without knowing that it would survive, and perhaps, on a quiet night in ancient Egypt, someone also lay awake, thinking about the day that had passed and the work that would come with morning. Outside, the stars turned slowly above the valley. A dog moved in a courtyard. Water touched the bank. Somewhere, a temple watchman listened in the darkness. Somewhere else, a boat rested against its rope. The great pyramids were already silent, or perhaps they had not yet been built. It depends on where we pause within those 3,000 years. Time in ancient Egypt is deep enough to contain many different worlds. There was an Egypt before the pyramids, when symbols were just beginning to become writing. There was an Egypt when Giza was a living construction site. There was an Egypt when those pyramids were already old and Hatshepsut's obelisks were new. There was an Egypt when Tutankhamun's name had nearly been forgotten. There was an Egypt when Greek was spoken in Alexandria, and priests still carved hieroglyphs in temple walls. And then there were long centuries when the writing could no longer be read, but the monuments remained beneath the sun. Now their words can be read again, although never completely. There will always be missing pages, damaged names, empty spaces, and questions without final answers. That is all right. We do not need every mystery to disappear. Sometimes it is enough to understand the shape of the story. A river, a valley, a people, and a civilization renewing itself across generations. Imagine the Nile beneath moonlight. The water is dark and calm. The cultivated fields are quiet. Beyond them, the desert stretches toward unseen tombs and temples. The air has cooled. The sounds of work have ended. A faint wind moves through the reeds. The river continues north. It passes the southern temples, the old quarries, the villages, Thebes, Abydos, Saqqara, Memphis, Giza, and the broad green delta. It carries no memory in words, and yet it connects every part of the story. The kings have gone. The workers have gone. The language has changed. But the river is still there. And now, as our journey through ancient Egypt slowly comes to an end, you do not need to hold on to any name or date. Let them drift away. Khufu and Hatshepsut, Tutankhamun and Ramses, Isis and Osiris, temples and tombs, papyrus and stone. Let them pass gently, like boats moving through the darkness. There is nothing more you need to remember tonight. The Nile will continue on its way. The desert will remain quiet beneath the stars, and the old stones will rest, just as they have rested through so many nights. You may rest as well. You may let the story fade into the background. And if sleep has already found you, then the story has done exactly what it was meant to do.